Hello and welcome to Evansville Podcast. My name is Jason Burton. Thanks for listening. On today's episode, it's a little different. I'm barely involved. We have Matthew Neville and Justin Groenert. They came on after the third presidential debate to do a recap of the debate and kind of where the presidential election sits. We didn't really touch on any local issues, but in the near future, look for more from them on special episodes of the podcast. We're kind of subtitling these politics aside as a show in a show within a show, like Inception. So, and before we get into the show, I wanted to let you know about today's sponsor, that is eLuxury Supply. eLuxury Supply, I'm not sure if you're aware, they are a local Evansville company. They're veteran owned and they do a great job. They sell mattresses, sheets, and towels, and a whole lot more. And you should definitely check them out. Go to eluxurysupply.com. And if you end up picking something up, use the offer code Evansville Podcast 10. It's all one word, Evansville Podcast, the number 10, and it gets you 10% off of your order. So check them out. And that offer is only good for the rest of this year, 2016. So once January 2017 hits, that offer code is no good. So check them out. Support local. They're doing a great job, and their mattresses are pretty sweet. So, yeah, on to politics aside.
Welcome, everybody, to the Politics Aside podcast, a subset of the Evansville podcast fiefdom that Jason Burton has eloquently put together. I am with my dear friend, Matt Neville. I'm Justin Groenert. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about the third presidential debate. It has wrapped up about 10 minutes ago.
We made it.
We did. We have survived as a nation through the debate process.
19 days to go.
Not that Matt Neville is counting at all. I think there are plenty of people out there listening to this that are probably counting too. I'm going to admit there's a Cubs game going on, so I may be slightly distracted. So if there's any crazy noises coming from my phone, you know what happened.
If we hear hooting and hollering or see Justin jumping up and down, we can assume there's something good or something bad happening.
Right.
Too.
Absolutely. So Matt, let's kick this thing off. I'm going to let you kind of start the conversation, and we'll go from there.
I mean, looking at the third debate, I think this was obviously Trump's best performance. I think that, that's obviously, not the highest bar to be tripping over as what his first two debates were. But I think that, he seemed a lot calmer. He was able to articulate a lot better. I don't know if he actually took the debate prep seriously. I think that was probably part of it, is he actually did debate prep. He actually worked on getting things down into sound bites, all of the normal things that you and I both have done with debate prep with candidates. Yeah. It's just the very basic things that you do. I think he was able to articulate things, obviously being the Democrat of this podcast, I disagree with many, many things that he said, but I thought, articulate wise, retail politics wise, he was able to frame his things a lot better.
Absolutely. I think it sort of frustrates me a little bit as a Republican, that Donald Trump shows up in the third debate. He kept it together. He looked the part. This was a debate that centered around issues. I thought Chris Wallace did a nice job of keeping the conversation going.
And he focused on actual issues.
Right.
He let them spar a little bit, but it was an actual debate on the substantive issues, things that weren't covered in the first two debates that absolutely needed to be covered.
This was an absolute policy debate as opposed to a clash of personalities. And it drives me. I mean, it kind of makes me cringe a little bit, just because I want to know where this race would be if we had started out here instead of sort of the 45 minutes of good Donald and then the entertainer Donald showing up. I thought overall, this was very much more of a policy-focused, policy disagreement argument as opposed to just yelling at each other. I thought Hillary did what she had to do tonight, based on kind of the last week and a half in the presidential campaign. Obviously, the ground has shifted quite a bit, but she had very little to have to kind of clear. I think she just needed to get in, get out, and not get too bloodied. There were various exchanges that I thought, and we'll work through them here, that really were kind of interesting in terms of style and substance, but it never got off the rails into some of the women or Bill's escapades that we started the second debate with.
There was a couple of times where they, it was all three of them kind of yelling over each other, but those were a lot less than what we've seen in the past too. And Chris Wallace did a hell of a job in debating this and keeping them on point and enforcing the rules and making sure that everyone was kind of getting the equal time and really pushing people to have to actually answer the questions. He did that on both sides too. So I mean, I know there's going to be liberals and conservatives both that are going to complain about him, but I thought he did a very admirable job. He was probably the best moderator of the ones that we've had in the 4 debates total we've had.
Okay, everybody, it's 9:52 p.m. and a Democrat just gave Chris Wallace passing marks.
I will give him.
Done.
I was very concerned, as a liberal, seeing it's going to be a Fox News host. I had my concerns, but Chris Wallace is a journalist. If I'm not mistaken,
absolutely.
He's not a Sean Hannity. He's not a Bill O'Reilly. He's an actual respectable journalist who cares about his craft, and that was a very important thing to see.
Absolutely. All right, so you want to get into some specifics tonight?
I know one thing that he said that very much concerned me, and it's something that he's been kind of echoing for a while, was he was asked, a pretty straightforward question of, are you going to accept the results on Election Day?
Right.
And he didn't really answer the question. He pretty much said, we'll wait and see.
Right.
Which essentially, to me, means if I win, you better believe I accept him. If I lose, I'm crying bloody hell.
I have some concerns about this. I think the one thing that we can't do is try to undercut our electoral process. I find it amusing that this whole conspiracy theory notion, the amount of work that would have to go in to throwing an entire national election in a race that is seemingly Clinton's to lose handily already is mind-boggling in scope and scale. I thought Clinton did a nice job in this debate of hammering him on the times where he has basically said, well, it's just rigged, the whole thing. I thought the Emmy thing was pretty great.
That was a good line to be able to pull out and use.
Because again, it's like he has a pattern of going on Twitter and saying crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And he doesn't say it on these debates. He doesn't get into it, but for whatever reason, Donald Trump's demon is Twitter. And I would really, again, I go back to it. I would love to see the shape of this race right now with this third debate leading the charge and Donald Trump being more of that not typical Republican candidate, because
he's certainly far from that.
Yeah, he's very far from that. But to be more traditional in his ability to articulate policy,
his presentation.
Yes. And then to keep him off Twitter. Because really, that's where he kind of goes off the rails.
I can only imagine that they've tried.
Now I will say this though. This is sort of now I know Donald Trump is going to take it to the nth degree. He's an entertainer by trade, but I'm kind of concerned about the whole social media aspect of our politics. 2006 was the last election cycle without social media. I ran a campaign in Kentucky. You couldn't get on Facebook unless you were a college kid. So it was literally the last one without social media. And then, 2008 happens. Barack Obama is the guy that figured out how to use that medium, I think, properly.
Yeah.
He has done a masterful job of reaching out to people through social media in a way that Hillary Clinton didn't see coming in 2008. And now we've been here for a decade. You've had Twitter, Facebook, Skype, Instagram,
Snapchat,
whatever the new ones the cool kids are using. And I think there's something to be said for how that impacts how we look at elections and how we elect our leaders. What's your take on that? I mean, you're only slightly younger than me.
I mean,
but
for anyone
I'm
who
interested
is friends with me on Facebook, know that I will occasionally partake in political discussions on Facebook.
Wait, what?
And by sometimes
Seriously?
I mean many times a day because I just simply enjoy it.
Well,
And
it is kind of your job too. In fairness,
That is true.
You do get paid to do it.
And
but-
I think part of the issue with social media is that, I think, as you said, Barack Obama was very good in 2008 of using it as a way of organizing, and it's really a good way of preaching to the choir. You're not going to convince a whole lot of people of
Right.
much. It's really going to be the confirmation bias of this sounds correct, this
Sure.
looks correct, so I'm going to believe it. And, a lot of the things that you see on social media now that are about Hillary or about Donald is a lot of it is just out and out untrue. And I think that feeds into why we have such a negative opinion of both of the candidates, is because there is so much negative things out there. A lot of it true.
I was going to say,
a lot of it
they've
false.
both, in fairness, they've both earned their stellar reputations.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we could go through the list of Donald and Hillary at this point. Neither one of them are ideal candidates.
No. But both candidates certainly have their flaws.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think social media, it's become an outlet for, especially you'll see things on Twitter. It's an outlet for people, Twitter more so than Facebook. You can anonymously just send out the craziest things. You can say the meanest things.
Right.
I think social media has changed our politics in a way that I don't think anyone really understood or saw that it was going to.
Right. And I think that's going to be the key going forward is how do you deal with the shift in the floor that we're all standing on in terms of how we run elections, how we win elections, and how do candidates play into that?
And especially with the changing landscape of, newspapers are doing less and less publication, moving to more and more online. Most of where we get our information is online, and it can sometimes be difficult to see the difference between their Courier and Press website and what you see on Facebook. Those can kind of mold together in your brain.
Absolutely. And I think that's something we're going to have to follow as we go forward, because we're going to have to find a better way to fact check and do that. And to some extent, and again, it goes back to that whole dichotomy of the media, and there's a business side to the whole thing, and then there's the fact checking or the fact finding portion, and there's the news portion and the business portion. And Donald Trump, I think, has done a masterful job, to your point of whether he concedes or not, of being able to blame the media for his own problems. And I think there may be some small merit to that, but I don't think that merit is any different than any other election cycle ever. This is not the dichotomy that is any different than it was in 1960 or 1858, when there were 15 newspapers a city, and you could read the one that fit. I mean, it was back then. It was kind of the Fox News or the MSNBC or the CNN. You had your favorite newspaper. Yeah. They told you what you wanted to read, and so from that standpoint, it's a lot similar. But because of the avenues that Donald Trump has had to kind of help portray this narrative that it's all rigged and it's a gamed system, and I'm just the guy that is getting screwed here in the end. I find that really kind of an interesting subset of your larger point.
I mean, the idea of the loser of a campaign, the foundation of our democracy is that people vote.
Right.
We have elections. Yeah. We have winners and we have losers. Yeah. And the losers will concede to the winners, and we all kind of form together.
Peaceful transition
of power is the absolute foundation of our democracy. And the fact that we have a major party presidential candidate who is actively saying, well, if I might be okay with the election result, I might be okay with this peaceful transition. And he seems to be goading his people into distrusting a lot of things.
Now, I will say this. I think this is one of Donald Trump's strong suits, where he doesn't quite say it. He alludes to it on social media. He alludes to it places and lets people hear what they want to hear, and then just doesn't deny it. I mean, he didn't say
he didn't
say I'm going to throw our entire democracy into chaos. And in fact, Ivanka today said that her dad would take the result as it came.
And Mike Pence has said that
as well. And Mike Pence has said it too. But he does just enough to keep the alt-right sort of uber conservative group of his base fired up.
But here's the one thing of that strategy that confuses me, is that I get the idea that he's saying that to his supporters. But if you're a Donald Trump supporter and you're being told over and over again, this election is rigged, your vote doesn't matter,
right,
why will you go vote on election day?
That's a good point. This doesn't help your case.
It does not help his
right,
case. It's going to make him lose more.
I think
and all that really does is build his case stronger. He is sabotaging your Republican Party a lot by that, because a lot of those people
In fairness, wait a second. Whoa. He's sabotaging our Republican Party by a lot of different ways.
That is true.
In my humble estimation. However, again, I'll bring it back. I think we've gone there. He had a really good night tonight, all things considered. One of the exchanges that I thought was pretty interesting, and this was one of those weak moments for Hillary Clinton, was the whole pay-to-play thing. You're talking about the Clinton Foundation and the work that they do, and this weird sort of anomaly that a lot of the things she was doing and her time at the State Department happened to be coinciding with the things that the Clinton Foundation were doing. And while I think it is worth looking into, she didn't have a very compelling answer, Matt. She pivoted pretty strongly on that.
Away. I mean, that was I'm surprised she didn't break her ankles and how quickly she pivoted on that. I mean, that was, she obviously that was not a question that she necessarily wanted to answer. The whole pay to play thing, I've seen some about it. I've not studied it as much as I would like, but from what I've seen, it's kind of, as you described it, of things that are happening over here, things that are happening over here. The question is there a correlation in the middle?
Right. And I was kind of surprised we didn't hear more of it. There's a lot, and I'm going to give you a chance to kind of bash me in the face here, but I got to bring them up. So lately this week, we've heard a lot about Donald Trump in the video, and we'll get to that in a minute. But while all that is running around in this sort of media frenzy about what Donald Trump did or didn't say a decade ago, and again, I'm not defending any of that sort of sucked the air out of a lot of the campaign the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You have this scenario where there seems to be increasing evidence that there was some sort of backroom deal between the FBI and the Justice Department and the Clinton campaign, and it came up towards the end a little bit. I think there were opportunities that Donald may have left on the table to, again, tell that larger narrative of she's not trustworthy. She's been there for 30 years and hasn't fixed a lot of the problems. She's crooked. Crooked Hillary never came out tonight.
I don't think he's actually ever said that in a debate.
Tweeted it.
He's tweeted it, but he's never said it in a debate.
He might have at the end of the first one.
I know he said the word crooked a couple of times, but I always kept waiting to see if he would say that.
I think, and again, I go back to, I wish this Donald had shown up in the first debate, and to this, to the second debate. I think we'll talk about it here in a minute. He had an opportunity to lace together sort of all of the narratives that Republicans see as her flaws as a candidate, and she has plenty of them. The whole she's been around the block a time or two, and what's really changed, the emails, it all feeds into this sort of untrustworthy narrative, and yet he never really landed really landed the way that it needed to land, I think, for him to ultimately move the needle.
And there was no knockout punch,
No.
I think especially with
For either one of them, quite frankly.
for neither one,
Which is insane because they both have stuff on a tee waiting to get knocked
they
down.
both been just swinging.
Right.
It's the last 30 seconds of the 12th round, and they're just swinging wildly, hoping something hits.
Sure, and I think at some point though, Hillary tried, and she got under his skin once or twice, and Donald tried, and Donald got under her skin once or twice.
Yeah.
But all in all, they never really, neither one of them, there was never that one moment in any, I think, of these three debates where you were just like, oh, that's it. And we're done.
Then again, there's been a lot of things that Donald Trump has done that we have said, oh, this is the end of the campaign. This is it. And he comes back every single time.
Okay, you're leading me into this because I think as despicable as what was on that tape that came out Friday and a half ago, as grotesque as all of that was, you got to kind of give Donald a little bit of credit in how he handled the chaos that went down from Friday to Sunday in that second debate. I mean, you're talking about a presidential campaign in free fall.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking about replacing the nominee for a major party 5 weeks out, and he shows up that Sunday, and he kept the floor from crater.
He treaded water.
Now he did what he had to do. You know what he did? He got his base back. He went after her, with the exception of the women that he garnered in and made Bill with the greatest meme face ever. He actually went after her in a way that if he had just kept the circus act to a minimum, this could be a very different race today. I'm not saying he wins, because like I said, his path was always more difficult than not, but he went after her in a way that he didn't in the first debate. On the emails, on Benghazi, on the change versus more in the same narrative, he nailed a couple of
He had
really
some good lines. He did,
and I'm not sure there are other. Now, granted, most politicians wouldn't be in that situation to begin with, but you kind of have to give him a little credit for being able to at least triage the free fall to get himself to tonight, and then to be able to change his demeanor to actually debating. On some level, you got to give him a little bit of credit.
If you look from debate 1 to debate 3, he has improved drastically.
Immensely.
And I will agree that when that tape came out on Friday, I was up till probably 3 a.m. just watching the coverage of it, just because it was just nonstop.
Incredible.
And you're sitting there thinking, how is this happening? How does he come back from it? And he stood up there at the debate, and he was able to tread water. He wasn't able to scoot it away, which I don't think anyone was really going to be able to do that. No. But he was able to tread water and to keep his base.
And I was going to say, there's not a lot of people that could have pulled that off.
No.
It's unprecedented. But then again, his whole campaign is pretty much unprecedented.
This whole election is pretty unprecedented. And that kind of pivots back to, do you think Donald Trump really moved the needle? Because, I think both of us somewhat agree, if the election was held today, Hillary Clinton wins in a landslide. So Donald Trump has to move the needle, have to get undecided. What, if anything, did he do?
I think he's much better off right now than he was before the debate. And barring another tape drop or another, sort of out of left field October surprise, he might have moved the needle tonight. I think there are a lot of Republicans that were coming around. I think Governor Pence has done a great job of getting the rank and file Republican to kind of go along with it.
And that was his role in being brought into the ticket. That was his entire role.
And you can't say he hasn't excelled at it. The only time that you've even seen him a little bit flinch is this last escapade with the tapes and all of that. And quite frankly, none of us would be in a position to handle that well.
It's an indefensible thing, and he had to do what he had to do.
It's tough. But I think what tonight did, building on the second debate, again, what Donald Trump did in that second debate was pretty damn impressive, all things considered. And you look at the tsunami of bad press, and obviously he was way in the wrong. But for him to show up and be sort of the presidential nominee for one, finally, I'll be interested to see what the numbers look like. I think it'll tighten again. I don't see, and this is not me being anti-Trump in this point. I think at this point it might be a little too late, but I think it could get a little more interesting.
So what it sounded like is that you're seeing the needle moving more on getting the Republican pace back, not so much getting those undecided moderate voters.
Absolutely. No. I think you're going to get more Republicans back.
Yeah, I would agree on that.
I think at the end of the day, wherever that needle fell, and when it fell, Clinton went from up 2 to 3, 4 nationally to 11. I think was the high water mark for her. I think this race goes back to 4 or 5 before it's all said and done, barring some late night change in
late night tweeting,
or some other October surprise. Again, Hillary Clinton's never been able to close the deal yet either. This is not a race that is a complete foregone conclusion. I think she is in the driver's seat. I think if you look at the electoral map, she has a vastly easier path to 270. But I think to Donald Trump's credit, he did what he had to do to at least make it interesting. And now it's the mad dash to Election Day, and we see where it all lands.
You mentioned the electoral math. I know we talked a little bit earlier about it. The new polls from Utah are showing independents. Evan McMillan is leading by 3 points.
Now,
which
this is something that I think is for the history books.
Absolutely.
For a independent candidate who's literally been running for
4 or 5 months.
Has it even been that long? Look that up. You've got the.
We're gonna Google that.
He's got the computer up. But for him to be able to be 5 points clear of the 2 major party candidates in a state is unbelievable. And quite frankly, I think it could throw this whole election into chaos. You start taking states out. You start taking whole states out of that 270 equation for a third party candidate. It's not going to take a whole lot to throw this thing into real chaos. You thought Bush Gore was fun when we're talking recounts. Let's throw this thing into the House of Representatives in 2016.
Evan McMullen announced his candidacy on August 8th. So he has been officially running for 2.5 months, and he is and if there was any state this was going to happen, it was going to be Utah, because you have the large Mormon population.
Right.
What's kind of divergent, but one of the things that's been fascinating for me to see is that Donald Trump, for all of his faults, for all of the immoral things he said and done, is still getting a higher percentage of the evangelical vote than Mitt Romney did.
Yep.
And I think if you were going to see any state that was going to kind of peel off, Mormons tend to be much more conservative in their viewpoints. They're going to view the things that Donald Trump did a lot more negatively than some of the other evangelicals may. Utah was going to be a state where it was going to tighten anyways. I don't think anyone really saw Evan McMullen kind of coming out of anywhere and being able to propel himself in a state.
I think that you could have possibly seen that with Gary Johnson, but you've seen a couple of unfortunate gaffes. Where is Aleppo? What is Aleppo? And some of that
talking about
stuff.
Global warming, that in 5 billion years the sun's going to encompass the earth, which fact check is correct.
Well, there you go.
That's not a good answer on global warming.
Truth is truth. Well, you had the who's your favorite foreign leader, and I've got one, but I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah.
I think he could have been in a better position. I think at the end of the day, I don't know that Evan McMullen's going to win Utah at the end of the day. But I think what you're seeing is sort of this weird shift in the map. I mean, there are states that are in play right now that are
Texas and Georgia.
Texas is with I don't think there's going to be this fundamental flip where we have Reagan Mondale, where Mondale wins one state and Clinton's not winning 49 states.
No, that'll never. The way that the people associate with political parties
Right.
now. That is
It's
never
gonna be
going to happen.
I won't say never, but it's going to be really hard to do that again. I think, though, when you have to spend resources in places like Georgia and Texas and Indiana now, I mean, Indiana is less than 5 in a state that Donald Trump was winning by 10 2 months ago. That doesn't help his case to getting to that 270. But I think there's a weird. You're seeing a lot of weird shifts that just aren't traditionally thought of this election cycle, and I don't know that we have 2 historically disliked candidates, obviously, so we're already there in terms of it being unique. I'm also interested to know what the changes in demographics in these states are doing to either exacerbate or kind of keep the homeostasis of sort of the electoral map, in spite of the fact that we have 2 historically disliked candidates.
And that kind of pivots to one thing I think we were going to end with, was kind of where the Republican Party goes from here. But I know we want to talk about kind of a little bit of
a second. We're going to talk about where the Democratic Party tier goes too, pal. Let's not just dump all on the Republicans.
Well, we're going to have a president, so we've got a clear leader. But that's not. We can address that when we get there. But talking about election day results, I think both of us tend to be in agreement that this is Hillary Clinton's race to lose. It's a difference of by how big of a win, how many states. I mean, I think the idea that the polls of her being up 10 or 11 are going to hold are absolutely ridiculous. I think I agree with you that a lot of that is Republicans not supporting him, and that will change after this debate and once they're just in the polling booth.
And again, I think too, Donald Trump had to have a really good night tonight.
He did.
And I think he had as good a night as he could have, all things considered. I think at the end of the day, it's gonna tighten again. We're gonna have a race. It's gonna be, and it always does. Naturally, you have this sort of shrinking of every lead ever when it comes to this kind of stuff. As you get closer to election day, and like I said, in Indiana specifically, we have more people registered to vote now today than we've ever had in the state's history. Yeah. I think there is something to be said, something to watch. How many of these 0 and 1 proclivity voters, meaning they either don't ever vote or they only vote 1 out of every 4 elections, are actually going to show up and vote because they're not being brought into the polling data yet? I think that's a wild card to watch. That could make it really, really interesting on election night. But I do think, again, this is Hillary's race to lose, and sort of probably some massive bombshell that comes out. I think she will be the next president, unfortunately. But it is what it is.
But you have a prediction percentage-wise of,
I'm not going to go there. I think it's going to be somewhere between Bush Gore and Goldwater Johnson. We'll just say that.
So you're giving me a mighty wide range there.
I'm telling you, it's going to be somewhere in the middle. I'm going to be very uncommittal. Because like I said, again, you don't know how many of these voters are going to show up that are not sort of in the polling models. When you have years like this that are so unpredictable, I think figuring out who's actually going to show up to vote is increasingly difficult. You have sort of your non-traditional voters that are very fired up about Donald Trump. You have millennials that were very excited about Bernie Sanders. The question is, do they show up to vote for Hillary Clinton? Does their dislike of a potential Donald Trump presidency scare them into voting, or do they just stay home? And this is all stuff that you're not going to know until we get either a large enough sample size in early voting trends or election day.
I know a lot of the trends, especially if you looked at Florida and the number of new registrants, I think it was like 11-1 in favor of the Democrats. It was like 530,000 new Democrats were voting, and like 50,000 new Republicans. And I mean, that's just one state.
But what's ironic though too is we take it back from the presidential race into some of these Senate races. You just said Florida, and Florida's got a 5-1 advantage in registrants, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the DSCC just pulled all their money from Patrick Murphy. Marco Rubio is going to be a two-term senator from Florida.
As much as he probably doesn't want to be, he is.
Oh, stop it.
He didn't want to be in the
Stop
Senate.
it.
We'll get to Rubio later. But.
That'll be for another podcast. And then you got like Ohio, where Donald Trump, before sort of the video, had been solidly up 5 to 7 points. It was sort of shocking the amount of space he had. Those numbers have essentially flipped, and yet Rob Portman's still up 15.
Yeah.
And I think that is another fascinating thing to look at as we get into Election Day is, Paul Ryan's talking about how, oh God, Donald Trump's going to get sucked into this vortex, and the gap that people are going to vote for Hillary Clinton means that, the House is in play now and the Senate's in trouble. And he used 2008 as sort of his example, right? Well, in 2008, John McCain was the party's nominee. There was not this feisty primary. There was not 15 people on a stage showing off the various wings of the party, fighting it out amongst themselves. Everybody was tied to the hip to John McCain in 2008. The polling data right now does not show that the typical American voter puts Donald Trump and the Republicans running anywhere else on the ballot in the same box. Donald Trump is its own entity. And if you look at where these numbers are in some of these states, Indiana, Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, you're seeing Hillary Clinton with 10-point leads in some places. You've got Hillary Clinton up or down, anywhere from 4 to maybe tied in Indiana. You've got Florida, where she's up now. What did you say? Double digits? Was it 10 or 11?
Well, that was the new registrants.
Okay, new registrants. But
I think the polling, it's relatively close to the margin there. It's not a runaway by far.
But you've got Senate races that are Rubio is outperforming Trump.
Right.
Portman vastly outperforming Trump. So there is a very big disconnect. Hell, Toomey in Pennsylvania is outperforming Trump in Pennsylvania. I mean, Toomey's
Kelly Ayotte.
Toomey's in a
Hampshire
coin flip. So I think it's going to be very different to see how this shapes up in terms of you talked about, sort of the future of the Republican Party, because, every election cycle we've written off we write off each party depending on what happens. The Democratic Party has been dead 137 times in this country's history. The Republican Party has been dead for 137 times in the country's history. The bottom line is this: the Republicans run every level of government except for the White House, and with Scalia's passing, the Supreme Court is 8-8. The Republicans are the majority in the United States Senate, and I think they are still slightly favored to keep that majority.
I think it was like 60% for Democrats to take last I saw.
Okay, you keep telling yourself that, and we'll talk after Election Day. I still think the Republicans win 51-49. And Todd Young will be the next United States Senator.
That'll be another podcast
but
too.
That's going to happen. You got the House of Representatives, which I still don't think is in play.
No.
The Republicans own the majority of governors' mansions. We own the majority of state legislatures. We own the majority of state legislators in huge numbers. So we can talk about how sort of Washington is the end-all be-all for the health and vibrancy of a political party, but it's just not true. I mean, literally, the Democratic Party runs the White House, and we act like there's this like huge groundswell of vast superiority in party structure and ability to influence stuff. It just doesn't play out. So I say all that to say that I don't think the Democratic Party is in trouble. I don't think the Republican Party is in trouble. I think it's a unique, weird story to tell that we try to trump up, no pun intended, sort of the downfall of our political system, and yet we somehow in 20 years are going to be having the same story, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats that are getting beat at the national level.
I certainly don't think they're going anywhere, but the way I look at it is, if Donald Trump loses by 5 or 6 points, Reince Priebus, the head of the RNC, a couple of months after the election will resign, I'm sure, because once your party has lost 3 presidential elections in a row, that tends to be what happens.
It's generally frowned upon.
and
Generally speaking.
they like results. I think Paul Ryan is. I mean, I agree that the Republicans are going to keep the House. I think the Freedom Caucus gains a couple members, and the rest of the caucus loses some, and that's going to make it a lot more difficult for Paul Ryan to get reelected as Speaker, even if he wants. Why would he want to be Speaker?
Wait a second. I don't think that's going to be the case. There aren't enough seats where you're going to oust. You would have already had to have ousted them. At this point, there were no major Republicans that got beat in a primary by a far-right Tea Partier. There were none.
But my greater point is that Paul Ryan has angered some of the Donald Trump supporters in Congress, and those are going to tend to
yeah,
but I think they're going to take that out on him.
What you're saying, though, but you just said that they're gaining numbers. They're not gaining numbers. No. In fact, there were two incumbents that got beat on the Republican side. One was Renee Elmers, who was not sort of this party of no, and the other one was the guy from Kansas, whose name is escaping me at the moment, who was very much the party of no. He's the poster child of it. So I don't know that the numbers change. You're going to have the same 25 to 30 guys that are going to scream no. I think I guess you make a point.
They will have more influence because of the lesser
Democrats
numbers on the other side.
There you go.
And that's my greater point. Is
Okay,
that Paul
I got you now.
Ryan's going to have a tougher time of getting reelected Speaker, even if he wants to do it. And
Right.
so who in your mind needs to step up and lead your party? I know you were a Jeb Bush supporter in the
was a Jeb
primary.
Bush
You are
supporter.
not a fan of Donald Trump by a whole lot of means. Where do you see your party going, and where do you think it needs to go?
I will say this. In spite of the fact that Donald Trump won the primary, we had the deepest field in terms of actual candidates that could lead the country probably in history. I mean, you're talking senators, you're talking governors, Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, Chris Christie, Scott Walker, John Kasich. These are all people that could be president of the United States. So I don't buy the narrative that the talent pool in the Republican Party is dead. If you look at the primary, by any measure, Donald Trump got 37% of the primary vote, which means 63% of the Republican Party voted for someone else. So I don't necessarily buy the whole populist thing. That's not what I really believe in. I don't think we should be attacking trade. I don't think we should be, doing a lot of things. But this whole idea that there's not some talent pool, I don't buy it. You've got Scott Walker in Wisconsin, who had a rough go. This was kind of his first grand rollout at the national level. Was smart and got out early. I don't think he hurt himself at all. I think Marco Rubio goes back to the Senate, spends 6 years there, then looks at running sometime soon. He's still, I think, certainly very young. He's got at least two or three chances.
He's pretty young.
Yeah. And let's not forget Paul Ryan. It's a unique position to be Speaker of the House and then try to run for president. But most, I think at this point, the preconceived notions of what you can and can't do to be president are pretty well shattered.
This election has certainly changed a lot of that.
And I will tell you that in terms of policy, Paul Ryan is the brain of or should be the brain of the party. So as much as you Democrats kind of demonize him and try to say that we're going to kick Granny off a cliff and all of that ridiculous nonsense, he really is, I think, at least the thought leader of the party. Mike Pence. I mean, really, if you, I know it's kind of a touchy subject here, but if you, by any measure, he has been a vastly successful nominee for vice president. Vastly successful. He has been able to articulate a message at the Republican convention. He got through that vice presidential debate very well. I think he is in a uniquely difficult position based on sort of the tapes that came out to have to defend Donald Trump. But I think in terms of his ability to bridge the Trump wing of the party and the rest of the party, he was the perfect guy to do it. He's the reason a lot of members of Congress are sort of on on board with the Donald. I don't know that he wins the nomination in 2020. I think the last 2 weeks have probably hurt him more than they've helped him. But in the final analysis, I struggle with the idea that he's going to get blamed for the Trump stain, if there is one. And
that is its own kind of separate conversation of how much effect does Trump have on the people that were that close to him, supported him, Mike Pence being the running mate. I mean, you've got, people like Chris Christie, who has his own issues in New Jersey anyways. But I mean, I think it's its own separate conversation of what effect does Donald Trump have on those who were closest to him? I mean, Paul Ryan has kind of tried to distance himself from some of the comments. Marco Rubio might as well be Marcus Rubenstein in witness protection in Florida because he has not really come out and said or done.
In fairness, Marco Rubio has never been the forefront of Team Trump. Let's not try to act like he was on board ever.
He endorsed, though. I mean,
well, okay, but again, you have a certain party nominee. There are certain protocols that you've got to go through. You can't, as Speaker of the House, the will of the party spoke, and Donald Trump won the nomination. I get it. As the Speaker of the House, you have a responsibility to the party in your role as a leader in the party, not as your role as Speaker, because that's a different deal altogether. But as a leader in the party, and the Speaker of the House is the third in the line of succession, you've got some clout. You do have some sort of a responsibility to the party to toe the party line when you can. In the case of Donald Trump, obviously he stepped way out of bounds several times. And to that end, Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, to their credit, have said, we're done. We're going to focus on our caucuses so that we make sure that we have majorities in the House and the Senate. So I think that's still the great unknown, to your point, though. How much collateral damage should Trump not win have on the party? And I think we're going to go back to this whole soul-searching thing where we're going to have another Civil War fight out and figure it out.
You'll have another autopsy like you had of the 2012.
Oh, you mean the one we threw in the trash can about 37 seconds after we published it? Yeah.
That autopsy, it was a very good roadmap of where the party needed to go, and they really just ignored the hell out of it.
Well, it wasn't so much that the Republican Party did. I think the party itself, the infrastructure, tried. But you can only take your voters, you can only lead them to water. You can't get them to drink it. And there is obviously this underpinning of post-Obama anger, resentment, whatever you want to call it, that and then to have Hillary be sort of the poster child for the Democratic Party just kind of kept that fire going.
I mean, it was certainly a long burn within the party of,
Says the man who almost made Bernie Sanders his nominee for president.
I don't know, almost, but I mean, if you look at the total delegate count.
It was a nice pun anyway. It was a nice pun anyway.
I mean, what were we even talking about? Man, the Bernie Sanders thing just threw me off.
Oh, this is how you win an argument with Matt Neville.
I get
throw him off.
Shiny objects and
Squirrel.
It being 10:30 at night get me. But I mean, I think, man, what were we even talking? I had a good point too. Where were we going with that?
This is how I win with Matt. I just throw him off so he can't articulate his really good point.
Man.
So what else we have to talk about? We're getting kind of long here, so I don't want to keep.
I think that was pretty much it. I know you had started off by saying, this will be an ongoing podcast. I'm not sure how often we'll be doing it. I mean, I'm sure we'll try to get at least one more in before the election.
I think we could probably do. Sure. I think we have to do one post-election. I have to gloat. I have to gloat when Eric Holcomb gets elected governor and Todd Young's our next senator. I got to gloat.
Let's make sure we do that one on video. We get my victory dance in for John Gregg and Evan By being put in. But
all right, fair enough.
I have a couple questions from the
we have
questions. Okay. Ooh, I forgot what we were going to do.
Questions in a statement. One statement. Neville for president.
That
That
is an awful idea. I have a guess of who that was, and you know who you are, and you know that's a bad idea.
In fact, I'm going to admit it. He tweeted that. He Facebooked it from his phone as we were sitting here today.
You cannot prove that. Wrong.
One question is, other than the will you accept the outcome of the election question, was there any other compelling topics discussed?
I was just glad to see topics were discussed. They actually talked about issues, and they talked about Medicare. They talked about the debt. They talked about taxes. They got into those seemly things and the personal things about each other, but they actually discussed issues.
And I think, we started off with the Supreme Court, and we sort of went into the Second Amendment. We went into the right to life stuff, the Roe v. Wade question. So we covered a lot of things that should be sort of at the forefront of this election, and we didn't spend a lot of time on the sort of exterior crazy circus atmosphere that's gone around both candidates. I thought that was the most impressive part, and I think that in a weird way helped Donald Trump, because not only did we stay on topic, but he actually sounded like he knew what he was talking about. Like he didn't go off the rails.
He looks less like a ringleader when there's less of a circus going on.
Exactly. He looks like he actually looks like a nominee for president. I mean, he did. He looked the part. He never did anything crazy. Anyway, yeah.
He had a couple of his moments, but it was. I mean, I don't know if anything certainly stood out. I mean, as I said, I'm glad issues were actually discussed. It's about time that we were able to kind of get past the sexy things about emails and WikiLeaks and tapes with Billy Bush, which, by the way, if there was any Bush that was going to take down Donald Trump, it was almost Billy. That's got to hurt you bad as a Jeb supporter. Billy Bush almost got him.
Wow. I'm not going to touch that. I'm going to leave that alone. What else you got over there, Jason?
We got more questions?
Wait.
And/or presidential statements?
I didn't get him to stop his point before he completely put me in my place.
Poor Billy Bush.
I know. You'll get better with practice on that.
Thanks.
Yeah, and it was more of a general question. I'll kind of sum it up. It was basically, are either of you anti-Trump?
Are either one of us anti-Trump?
I mean, as a liberal Democrat who is supporting Hillary Clinton, I don't know if that classifies me as being anti-Trump. It would take a vast amount of money to get me to even consider voting for him. But I feel like the question was more posed for you as the Republican of the podcast.
I have been pretty unabashed that Donald Trump is not my favorite cup of tea when it comes to who could have been president. I'm not necessarily on board. I thought tonight though he did a really a great job of reaching out to guys that are like me, that are still sort of on that fence, that he showed that he was going to take it seriously, that he showed that he practiced, knew the issues. I don't think there was any issue, other than the sort of typical partisan disagreement that he bailed on or failed on miserably. I thought
there was no issue where you were at
just
the end
like,
of his
really?
statement, you were like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah, exactly.
There was no word salad on really either side.
Right.
What really happened.
No, and I thought tonight was a very well done debate. I think Donald Trump did exactly what he had to do to give himself a Hail Mary chance at this point. So I will say that I won't take the bait, other than to say that I thought he did a fairly nice job, all things considered.
We do have our first post-debate poll of who won, done by I believe this is the official news network of Donald Trump, CNN.
Really? Okay.
The Clinton won 52-39.
52-39?
52-39.
Okay.
Which is... All right. I think a lot closer than what a lot of the
previous
ones has been. And I think that's reflected in the things that we had discussed.
And again, I think, the initial read on this is she wins. I think you got to give it 12 hours. I think the bar was pretty low.
These Insta polls are worth absolutely nothing besides just something for us to talk about.
Because I think Donald Trump, the bar was pretty low, obviously. And I think by any measure, he surpassed the expectation level that most people thought he would bring to tonight. I honestly was pretty shocked. You think he's a cornered animal at this point. He was primed to be the wild card tonight, to try to throw the one crazy knockout punch and go off the rails trying to find it, and he didn't do it. No. And I think that goes a lot farther in getting some of those, married women voters that are so critical to winning an election.
And the ones that he's struggling badly with.
Well, yeah, obviously. I think him looking the part and him being articulate on issues that he hasn't been articulate on yet, and not taking the bait a lot of times when Hillary tried, I think could move the needle somewhat. Again, it's going to be a really, really tough road for him to turn around and win this thing. But I think if you're looking at the measure of where the bars were for both candidates, Donald Trump won the debate. No. I'm not saying in terms of policy and who did better. I'm saying
in the expectations
where the expectation game was, Donald Trump cleared his bar. Hillary Clinton stayed where her bar was. Now, for Hillary, she didn't have to clear a bar. No. She just had to get out of it and not set her podium on fire. Yeah. So I think they both won in their own respective measures, if that makes sense.
I would agree.
I think Hillary did exactly what she had to do. I think Donald Trump did more than most people expected. So I think the post-debate spin is going to be really interesting to watch.
I'll be up till 2 or 3 watching as always, but
I will get up early and watch Morning Joe and watch Miko want to cry at the idea that Donald Trump still is potentially going to be president. But I'll be interested to see sort of how this post-debate spin goes for the next 12 hours. And I think in 3 days, 72 hours, when we get the first round of national or state polling, I think that's going to set the table for if Donald Trump sees a bump and you see the sort of tightening that we think, Trump gets the momentum back in some level.
Momentum is important.
And as George H.W. said, it's all about the big mo.
The big mo.
You got to have the big mo. So I think we've got an interesting 20 days left. I mean, I don't think either of us with any sort of certainty at this point can say we know what's going to happen. As much as things have been pointing one way or the other, we've been wrong about just about everything.
There's still a lot of baseball left to be played in that game. There's a lot that can happen.
Absolutely. You got any other questions, Jason? Are we good to go? All right. Well, that is it for tonight. Thank you. I know it's late, but we
thank you for those who watched us on Facebook Live.
Yes. This is my second or third attempt at Facebook Live. I've done some for work, but this is my first run around with little Neville over here. But thanks for listening in. I hope you guys found it enjoyable, and we'll look forward to doing it again soon. Matt, nice job.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks again to Matthew and Justin for coming on, talking politics, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you really like it. Maybe we can talk them into doing a few more here before the election hits, and maybe even some afterwards. So thanks for your support. Make sure to go to eluxurysupply.com. Help support the shows that make our shows possible. So don't forget, Evansville Podcast 10 is your offer code. Just do it. You won't regret it. Good job, everybody.